Good. Well, that was a great presentation. It gave us a lot to think about. So we've heard a lot about some of the innovative ideas for successfully bringing e-learning to schools and to students today. And I'm sure there are a lot of you who would love to do these things in your school or district. But districts are, of course, grappling with budget cuts like we've talked about throughout the day. And I heard during the lunch conversation, people talked about not having the resources to do some of the things that they're hearing about. Including the cuts have been to federal programs for technology, like the Enhancing Education Through Technology, or EETT fund, which once provided $700 million annually in grants and now just doesn't exist anymore. But it's not as bleak as it sounds. Many technology innovations are helping districts cut costs over time. Cloud computing and virtualization, which we'll hear about during this panel, are being used to cut down on server use, help with storage space, and can ultimately save districts money. In addition, since schools and districts now have to watch every penny, they need to make sure the hardware and the tools they're investing in provides the most return for their investment. That can't happen without a strong and efficient technology infrastructure. And without an infrastructure that works to support initiatives in a district, officials won't be able to analyze and collect the data they need to prove that these endeavors are truly paying off and to steer them as they go forward. Also, as I mentioned earlier in the day, having a strong technology program in your district or your school means constantly reevaluating your programs. That may mean that new initiatives are adopted, but some old ones may have to go, and sometimes those are hard decisions to make. Luckily, today we have a panel full of people who've been through a lot of this already and can help guide all of you through some of this decision making. First, we have Bailey Mitchell, the Chief Technology and Information Officer for the Forsyth County Schools in the Atlanta metro area, and he is focused on personalized learning, collaborative classrooms, mobile computing, and teacher support in the district. Now, we were going to have Kim Rice from Boston here today. She was not able to make it. So luckily, we have Jay McPhail, who you saw earlier in the day, the Director of K-12 Instructional Technology and Career Technical Education at the Riverside Unified School District. And we have Lenny Shad, the Chief Information Officer in the Katy Independent School District in Texas, where he's worked on the district's mobile learning initiative and has helped make Wi-Fi available on nearly every school campus. And he's also worked on the district's Bring Your Own Device to School program. So, Lenny, I want to start a little bit with you. We heard about your district's Bring Your Own Device to School program earlier in the day, and we talked there was a little bit of discussion about equity, but I want to get back into that more, because if I'm a parent and my student doesn't have a cell phone, a smartphone, and another student does, I know you can't wait for everyone to get the same technology and to be on the same page. But if I'm the parent, I'm not going to be too happy about that. How do you deal with some of those equity issues?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the city of Philadelphia for bringing some rain. Those of you who know Texas, we haven't seen rain in about 9 months. So I took a picture of it and sent it back home to people to say, look what I'm living in today. So I'd like to thank the city of Philadelphia. When we start this whole initiative, I think you have to take a step back and fundamentally ask, why are you looking at bring your own device or mobile learning? What's the reason you want to do that? And if the reason is just about the device, that's not the right answer. The right answer is you're philosophically changing how you're instructing in the classroom. So my response to equity is it's not about the device. It's about how we're going to instruct differently. So we talked about collaboration. We talked about partnering. So these are all the things that when I sit in front of parents and we talk about the equity issue, this is what I answer them with. It's, we're going to have a classroom with kids that have a device that if your child doesn't have one, we're going to team you up. We also have the ability to bring in the mobile laptop carts, which traditionally those laptop carts have been rolled in 25 at a time and we hand it out to every student. Now what we're telling teachers is think about applying this in a different way. So now you're going to schedule that laptop cart not in groups of 25 but groups of 3 or 4. So we're philosophically changing how we're applying that technology, but our approach has been not to focus on the device. because then I could get into, I don't have a smart board in every class. I don't have, science pros in every class. And then that's a losing battle for any district. But we want to say that it's not the device, it's just changing how you're going to instruct.
Let me just follow up and ask you from an infrastructure perspective, how does, when there might be lots of different devices that, connect in different ways and do different things, how does that relate to the infrastructure that you have there?
Our approach in Katy was to basically set up a Starbucks-like. And so basically the kids come in, they connect to a public Wi-Fi very similar to what you do at a Starbucks. And that takes the device specificity off the table. Now, I don't care what device you have, as long as it's internet enabled, you can connect to our public Wi-Fi. It's a filtered network, right? And as we've heard, up on the panelists before, these kids that have cell phones, it really doesn't matter filtered or non-filtered, because they can connect to their cell phone network and they're on an unfiltered, network. So from Katy's perspective, you're going to connect to a public Wi-Fi that's filtered, and I don't care what device, because you're not logging into anything in our infrastructure. And we focused on Web 2.0 technologies inside the classroom. And so the Web 2.0, that allows just that need to connect to the internet. So our teachers have fundamentally been using Web 2.0 for 3 years, and we use that as this building block to get to this year when we had the kids bring their own device. Those teachers have had 2 years to learn how to use Web 2.0, learn when to use it and when not to use it. We've heard questions up here about I'm worried that FaceTime is going away. I'm worried that they're always going to be on their computer, and that is a concern. And what we've learned over the last 2 years is there's a time for these digital tools, and there's a time for traditional paper and pencil. And so we balance those things out. We spent 2 years getting to that point, and now our teachers are using Web 2.0. If the kids have their device, then they're able to connect and use it in the classroom.
That's great. Now, we've heard a lot today about budgets and people being concerned about money. Bailey, I'd like to ask you, and also Jay, about virtualization and cloud computing, something we hear about a lot. Why don't you just explain what those things are and whether you're using them in your district and whether they've saved money or saved resources, how they've worked?
I'll take on the cloud computing. For years now, we've always opted, if there's a way, anyway, that we cannot be responsible for a particular piece of hardware, that the provider will take that hosting function on and provide what I would call more of a 24/7 service plan, then we certainly gravitate to that in all instances. The problem you run into with a technology services shop is we don't particularly want to work in the evening or on the weekends if a system were to go down that we're responsible for. And increasingly with our instructional systems, students are coming back into our network using those systems, and we see incredible amounts of bandwidth being consumed from like 3:30 to 11:30 at night. So we know that those systems are being used in the evening, and it's just easier if it's out there in the cloud to have somebody else watching on your behalf. The thing, though, that we've noticed from a cost savings standpoint is most of the providers bundle the hosting services in with the product. You couldn't shop necessarily the hosting remotely aspect of the purchase. And it's not a very good deal in most instances. You know pretty much what businesses are paying for server space and remote hosting, and typically the pricing structure that we've seen coupled with the actual program or the services is not always a really good deal. So we're kind of in a quandary. We need for those systems to be available, and that's ultimately what we use as rationale to justify the additional expense. But at the same time, we know that we're probably paying a lot more than our business sector counterparts for that same kind of service.
So they're charging more to the education field than they would to,
Yeah, I think it's newer to the education field than it is to business and industry, probably. I don't have a theory as to why the pricing structure is different, but certainly it is.
If I can add to that, though, it's often easier for us in Riverside to find an extra $30,000-$40,000 that's tied into a vendor than it is to hire a full-time person. So I think that's your budget saving thing. I think the other thing is the locus of control. Just like we've been talking in terms of educational sense, that same thing is happening in the technical sense, to the point where we're starting to have conversations, why do we have our own network? If we can talk to Verizon, which we're doing some things with the Learning on the Go pilot, and to AT&T, why not then take that money, let them provide service, reduce costs on a device? And so but that's all about locus of control, and then the whole control manage thing I was talking about when I was up here up front is that it requires a certain level of letting that go because the vendor is responsible for it, not necessarily you. And I don't know how you guys handle data, but student data used to be, it's not going anywhere. Now it's everywhere in terms of what's going on.
And does that concern you, all three of you? No.
You know, I think another fundamental problem is we talked about these vendors and the cellular carriers and people like that. They don't have an education model. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to apply their business model to education, and it doesn't make sense. For instance, you know, mobile learning, our cell phone capability is turned off, the texting capability, all we want is the data plan, and yet when you look at the mobile packages, they've got all those things built in. And so we're trying to work with these cellular companies saying, create an educational package, and that dollar amount associated just for that, it will reduce it significantly, but they're struggling with that, you know. The other thing that we talk about is that there is this very dynamic and fast-paced world that we're talking about with Web 2.0 and the mobile devices, and you have to have an infrastructure capable of dealing with the dynamic part of that. And if your infrastructure isn't able to keep up with that speed, then you're out pushing as an educational institution, use technology, incorporate it, and yet you're not able to deliver it. That's when you start getting frustration from the teachers saying, quit pushing it on us if it's not going to work, right? Because that classroom, when I close that door, if it's 30 minutes to get a piece of technology working, I've just lost that class period.
Well, I think that's where you lose sort of the faith of teachers that they should even
Absolutely.
Bother with this, with the training and with all of
and
that.
It trickles down. Then the kids go home and say, geez, you know, what did you do in science? We sat and watched my teacher try and get the smartboard to work, right? So then the parents are out there. So then when you're in front of them at your next bond election, they're going, well, that's great. You know, we're not going to pay for that. So it's a trickle-down effect.
Again, though, I think that we've got to think beyond just the classroom. That's why we're having the conversation in terms of not having our own network, because we're spending millions of dollars on a network that's confined within the walls of our schools, while at the same time we're talking about the 24-hour connectivity that we want from our students. So in my mind, again, we've got to go back to the community, back to our students. You talked about equity. We have the conversation about the device in terms of, and it's a community conversation. It's not a school to you conversation. If this is really where we want to be, then we engage other resources, City of Riverside, those type of things to help provide that device to you. And the second part of that is more and more 3G or 4G connectivity anywhere you're at, because just even the home to school conversation is not where kids are most of the time. They're traveling, they're at the park or whatever. So we've got to, although we have to pay attention in the classroom, don't get me wrong, I'm often misquoted here. We've already pretty much maxed that out. And if a school district, ourselves included, because we had this conversation, we can dump millions of dollars to have a dynamic infrastructure in school, and all we've really done is solve one small part of the equation.
Well, we've talked about cloud computing. I'm hoping one of you can talk a little bit about virtualization and what it is and how it works in your school. I don't know who wants to take that.
I guess in the same as we look for things that we can have remotely hosted out in the cloud and certainly gravitate to that, we also have been setting for years a requirement for anybody that we do business with and partner with that they can run in a virtualized server environment. It's certainly much easier than in years past when we had a server for every application and never really were in a position to be able to support that adequately. So in our district, it's a standard that we hold our partners accountable to. Certainly, there's cost savings related to system engineering and just hardware and overall reliability in that kind of environment. So that's
Great.
From my perspective, the three areas of virtualization that we're really looking at is obviously server, like Bailey talked about, and that gives you immediate cost savings because you can put 13 servers onto one device, so you've saved money there. The area that we're really starting to explore is desktop virtualization and software virtualization. The software virtualization piece to me is what's really attractive because that gives us the ability to get software pushed out to 30,000 desktops very quickly without having hardly any transfer on our network wire. So the teachers can actually go in and it's almost like a click and pick. I click this application and I'm running it virtually. So it really saves us a lot of time from that classroom perspective. That teacher can get it very quickly. From a desktop virtualization, going back to your point, we've got to think differently than providing that hardware year in and year out in those refresh cycles because it's just not economically going to happen. So we're going in and looking at places like cafeteria systems and places where we're seeing high turnover in desktop failure, putting in a virtual desktop there because it's very inexpensive, and if it fails and I flop something out there very quickly and I'm up and I'm running. So to me, virtualization, those three areas I think are key when you talk about saving money in tight economic times.
That's great.
Well, the only other piece I'd add to that is increasingly we're really talking about two different networks. And virtualization, to me, falls more in the business network, the school business network in terms of what's going on, as opposed to the education network. At least that's the conversation we're having. An education network, if someone hacks in, they learn English. And a business network, I'm the first one to say I want to get paid, so don't hack into the money side of what's going on. But I think that's part of the conversation as well, is what parts are the business of doing school and what parts are the educational part.
Great. Well, now I want to ask all of you a question, so you can take out your active expressions remote. And the question is your district using cloud computing or virtualization to cut costs? So hit A if yes, B if no, C if you don't know. Hopefully you know what those two things are now. And I'm told you also need to push enter to have it recorded as well. So take a minute to just think about that and do that.
But that was, shift.
And then we will close it up and see the results. Oh, it seems pretty even. Do you think this is something that's so cutting edge that not a lot of districts are doing it? Are you surprised by this response?
I think part of your problem is the definition of cloud computing. Mm-hmm. So when you say cloud computing, I hear everything from a flavor of a Google, which is essentially cloud computing,
right,
to an extension of the school network, which is a school-owned cloud or a private cloud, and everything in between. I mean, our learning management system could be considered cloud computing. So I think part of it's your definition,
right,
but I'm not surprised that more people are going that way.
Right. Well, I also want to move on to talk a little bit about data management and analytics and how you're collecting that and what you're using it for, whether you're using it to sort of inform decisions you're making about what programs to keep, what to get rid of. Bailey, tell me a little bit about the data that you're collecting on students and their achievement and anything else that might inform your practice and what you're doing.
Well, I'd like to frame that with a project that we've embarked on, and that is certainly we have the student information system, and it has great analytics about student performance. It feeds information into an assessment system that we use for district benchmarking and local assessments that teachers give. And then we have a learning management system, which again has embedded assessments and some analytics around how well a child is performing when they're in that environment. And increasingly what we have come to realize is we build these data systems that we expect teachers to use. Often as educators, we'll build the cockpit of a 747 looking data system that nobody uses well, but as educators, we really can't help ourselves in that regard. We build 747s. And we in Forsyth have embarked on a project where we feel like a lot of that data maybe actually should inform the instructional systems and be working in the background, but that a majority of the teacher's time, and that is the key in any kind of use of data in your district. What systems are you going to have them parked in for most of the day to have the most benefit for students? And I would argue that increasingly it's not your SIS where you have grade book attendance and data analytics, but rather we want them in our learning management systems, and that the data feeds as it relates to progress and those kind of things that teachers need to be paying attention to are working in the background, allowing a teacher to be focused on learner plans and engaging learning objects and differentiation and individualization that comes along with that. And that a lot of what has been traditional in the way of analytics is, again, working in the background, but being put to use to make that teacher more effective in the instructional system.
Great. Jay, do you have something to add to talk about what you're doing?
Other than I agree with you, I mean, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, it also applies to data as well. And what, I talked this morning about a student data dashboard. And the hardest part about that dashboard was getting people to agree on the 5 key performance indicators that would show up, not the 500 they wanted. But I think, what we're all trying to get to, and even the superintendent that spoke this morning, is we're trying to get timely analytics that make sense to us, and whoever that us is, the end user, that we can act on. And that dashboard, which is literally 5 key performance indicators, is pulling off an area student information system that has all the complexity that you want. You can drill down, but we found that not only were our teachers not using it, our students never even saw it. So,
the one thing that I would add is anytime you talk about analyzing data, it's not one-stop shop. You've got to look at who is analyzing it. If it's a teacher, that's a completely different look than me as a CIO. And so you've got to step back and you've got to say, okay, as a teacher, what do you want them analyzing? And performance of a program, an ed tech program, that's not what you want your teachers analyzing. There's another group that should be out there analyzing how is this program performing, and do we want to sustain it? Do we want to replace it? But too many times you end up having a group of people deciding, okay, here's what a teacher wants to see, here's what this person wants to see, and you roll it out, this very data-rich application that nobody uses. And so I think when you talk about analytics, you've got to bring those teachers in, and you've got to say, as a teacher, what do you want? What we found in Katie is it's even down to an elementary teacher wants to see this, a junior high teacher wants to see this, and a high school teacher wants to see that. Once we started at that level and got the buy-in, then that's when it became very powerful. And teachers were saying, man, this is what we've been looking for. A principal saying that same kind of thing. So I think you've got to target your audience and create that dashboard for your audience.
Right. I want to go back to, we've talked a lot about today about the money issue, but I want to ask all 3 of you, what do you think is sort of the technology innovation that has been most beneficial in terms of either saving money or getting more for your money, being able to do more with a particular technology or a particular initiative?
I would share that it's been a long time coming that we see the demise of the textbook spend. In 2008, our textbook spend was about $90 a student. And this year, it's about $6 a student. And what it's allowed us to do is to get airtime in the conversation around leveraging less expensive, highly engaging digital resources that we're able to author on our own, but also that we're able to subscribe to from our partners. And we've actually seen, a descent on textbook spend that'll never come back, and an ascent on our online investment. And we've also experimented with changing teacher roles from that of the classroom teacher to a content developer, pulling our finest language arts and math teachers out of the classroom, putting them in a development effort. And in 6 months, we've harvested and developed on our own, free off the web and internally with teacher resources and sharing, 6,300 learning objects for math and English language arts that we're going to use in our learning system, our personalized learning system. So those are some strategies that we have embarked on to kind of scaffold teachers away from what we've always known as traditional learning materials.
Great. Jay, what do you?
Well, it has to be BYOT. I mean, in terms of a budget that didn't exist, we were able, I mean, we went in Riverside Unified, every state's got their budget crisis, but over the last 3 years, we've cut $100 million from our operating budget. In the same time, we've added 25,000 devices onto our network. So when you put those metrics together, there is no way that that could come together without the BYOT. Also digital textbooks, but I think digital textbooks, for us, there was a period that we're just coming out of where it was actually costing us more money because we had to run both systems simultaneously. So we're still checking out books to some kids, but providing digital textbooks to others. Once you make that switch, I agree, it's a huge cost saving, but that interim is actually costing us more.
And Lenny, would you say for you it's been the bring your own technology?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you have to look for automation, right? And we talked about that, virtualization, getting the software out quickly. So you've got to look at way of streamlining things because nobody's going to be able to add staff, but yet, you know, you've got these demands coming in. Bring your own device, I absolutely agree. And what it did for us is it laid the groundwork for thinking about education in a different way. And, you know, you talked about that, the traditional network and all of those things that everybody has grown up with, that's got to move in a different direction. Bring your own device helps facilitate those conversations because now it's getting people to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Now you can talk about cloud computing. Now you can talk about digital citizenship. So it was a great segue for us. The other thing that I would tell you has really helped is virtual meetings, using tools like Adobe Connect, where now I don't have to bring teachers into a meeting. And now I can have this collaborative fifth grade teachers across the district talking about what lesson plan they did inside for mobile learning. So that streamlines communication, reduces costs. We don't have to have subs coming in. So we're using that extensively in the district. I had lunch today with Tom from Quakertown. Tom, where are you at? There we go. I'm expecting those Philly tickets since I mentioned your name, man. No, but he's talking about collaboration in these online sessions that his teachers are using. So that's an important way to help get that mindset of we've got to think about it differently. So I'd say those two things.
And I just want to quickly do one more poll. And so take out your Active Expressions remote. And I want to ask you, does your district support a bring your own technology to school model?
Can I add one thing?
Please do.
I think also how you, when we first started talking about BYOT, our traditional structure started adding up the dollars just for supporting that, and it was $10, $12 million. The other part of BYOT is using your students to provide technical support. We don't have the budget to do the automation piece, so kids are handling the management of content. Kids are handling their own tech support. Those are things that we don't pay for. If we had tried to do it within the system, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
You know, a funny story is when we were rolling out BYOT, we had a parent group at one of our high schools saying, my God, you realize the technical demand you're putting on your teacher, because what happens if a kid's device can't connect? And I said, are you kidding me? You've got a classroom of kids. One kid says, I can't connect. They've got 28 people stepping in saying, oh, here, let me fix this for you. So the tech support has not been an issue.
And I think one thing you have to consider when you're looking at BYOT is really a spin shift. In our case, we never had a computer that was over 3 years old for the last 10 years in a leasing program. And we've drastically changed and shaped our leasing program, reduced it to reinvest in wireless infrastructure and to pay for broadband. Because with BYOT, if you're just getting started, you can pretty much expect you're going to need 3 times that much in the first year. And so shopping for broadband, looking for solutions in that regard, and investing in your wireless infrastructure, that money's got to come from somewhere, and basically you have to stop doing some things to enable that.
Great. Well, I see most people don't have such a program, so maybe this will inspire some of you out there to give it a try. Now I want to go to some questions, and I want to start with our live stream. out there.
All right, thanks. We've got one question from our chat channel. It's from Sidad, and he asks, can anyone point to statistics describing the trend of bring your own technology adoption in schools?
I'm assuming they mean how many schools are doing something like that?
Statistics on bring your own technology.
Or whether
it's successful or...
I don't know, either one. Anyone have a thought?
Well, the one thing that, and if you use just a common sense approach to this, if we do this right, you've now tripled the instructional minutes in terms of whether they bring their own device or whether you provide it, right, away from class. So from the data we've been running, we've been seeing a bump in student achievement. But I think the question is probably about who's doing it throughout the nation.
Well, let me just ask you, when you say triple the instructional minutes, do you mean that students are working on the class outside of
Think about how you and I work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I flew in last night at midnight. I had about 20 emails I had to answer from the board and from whoever. I can't say, sorry, I show up at 8:30, that's when the bell rings, that's when I engage, but that's how we've trained our kids. Our kids are learning 24/7, they're just not learning what we want them to. So we've got to intersect in terms of what's going on, and that's what I mean by the potential of tripling the day.
Well, and potential of tripling, I'm not tripling, but squaring the classroom period. Our speakers in the last session had us online doing back channel communication. You put BYOD in a classroom setting, and by default, you have a lot of back channel communication going on between the students and their peers, and they're essentially, as teachers describe it to us, squaring the effectiveness of the class, essentially doubling the activity that's going on in that classroom. They're paying attention and doing well and engaged, but they're also very efficient at back channeling with their peers and collaborating and doing those kind of things, collaboration, communication, and being creative that we consider 21st century skills.
Great. Well, let me make sure I get a couple of questions from the audience before I run out of time. Who's got a question? Well, if not, I'll take another one from the live stream.
Well, the questioner followed up, and he did ask how many schools, are there any statistics that show how many schools are using BYOD? So in Forsyth, there's 35 schools. We've been at it since 2007, the last couple of years, more intently. And if you had asked us at the end of last year, it would have been about 28 of our 35 schools. The peer pressure was such from parents and students in those schools that were not engaging with this that we have 100% of our schools engaged now in BYOD. Not 100% of all of our teachers all throughout the day, but it is that critical tipping point, I think, for getting to the point where it'll be pervasive.
Well, I want to ask someone out there, someone who answered no to the poll, if you can tell me why you think what are some of the concerns that your school district has, or why you've decided not to go in that direction. Oh.
Hi, my name is Brooke Malarchuk. I'm from Methacton School District. We don't have wireless anywhere in the district.
That would be a big problem.
So that
Would it be, though? I mean, my question back to you is how many of your kids are carrying a device and a network with them? So, my point is, I think for all of us, we hit can'ts right up front, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we could probably all talk at length of the can'ts from the feds to the state to our own board to parents, whatever. The easy message is that for all of you that are in B and C, you can do this tomorrow. You've already got people doing it. So the conversation has moved from can't to how. We need more people to engage in the how so we can figure out best practice, whatever. But the can'ts are really self-imposed fears and limitations.
How does SIPA work when you're asking students to do work on their mobile devices, but they're accessing their own networks?
Well, in our case, I'd answer your question by saying, the intent of SIPA is to keep kids safe. So you work down that road. But realize that right now, depending on where you're at, your kids are already doing this. They're just doing it in their pocket or in a purse.
And I would say that SIPA applies to the school district owned and provided and paid for bandwidth and connectivity resources.
It's on, I mean, we all know that that's the wild, wild west to monitor what a student does on their own data plan. We find, though, that really good Wi-Fi in a building, and that is part of our acceptable use. We haven't made that migration over to using your personal data plan because we provide a very robust Wi-Fi opportunity, and there's really not a reason to. But that's my interpretation of SIPA, is that it applies to the district-provided broadband, what you pay for as a district. There's no way you could.
You know, the one thing that you've got to incorporate into a bring your own device program is digital citizenship, digital responsibility, and you've got to be willing to sit in front of a group of parents and answer these hard questions, because every question that's come up in this session today, I've had come up with parent meetings. And so you've got to be willing to sit down and talk to them about SIPA. And you're exactly right. The kids are bringing the phones with the data plans, the connectivity to the internet right now that isn't SIPA compliant. So you as a parent, you should be concerned whether I as a school district do bring your own device or not, because your kids can get to inappropriate sites. What you've got to include in the conversations is appropriate behavior. And Darlene talked about it a little bit earlier. My biggest frustration is 7 hours a day we wrap the kids in this tight protective cocoon and tell them where they can go, what they can do. They walk out the doors, and 17 hours a day they're in the adult world. And we act surprised that the kids don't know how to do it. We as educators and in K-12, we need to bridge that gap. And that's a risk, because mom and dad really like to know that there's that security blanket for those 7 hours a day. You have to help them understand, but the 17 hours is what you should really be afraid of. And so this bring your own device in conjunction with digital citizenship, digital responsibility, will move forward with this. And you're right, Bailey, our public Wi-Fi is filtered. We're telling the kids, when you're on the public Wi-Fi, and parents, you're protected. You want to go off the reservation, right, and go on to the wild, wild west of the internet on your data plan, then there is disciplinary actions that will happen. And there's consequences, just like misbehavior inside the classroom without technology involved.
And the FCC itself understands that their rules are somewhat antiquated. They are changing. We're involved with the pilot with the FCC in terms of looking at what the intent of the law is and how it's being applied. So often the can'ts, in fact, the first can't we hit was, well, you're breaking SIPA law. Well, no, we're not, just for the reasons that were just described.
Great. I want to get to another question.
Well, I think that you probably already addressed this to a certain extent, but I think the concern is, someone mentioned earlier equating the internet misbehavior or misuse with the way we used to behave inappropriately when we were youngsters, bringing a magazine to school and reading a magazine and pretending you're reading from the textbook or doodling. I think the major concern I would have, and the major difference I think that many of us have been speaking about, is that those kinds of inappropriate behavior were not dangerous behaviors. Those kinds of misbehaviors affected only that individual. And, you know, I think that as a educational leader, the primary responsibility we have is to keep our students safe. And I think that you were addressing that, but I couldn't help but think about the major difference between inappropriate behavior when I was a kid and the amount of inappropriate material that's out there in the World Wide Web. It's really scary, I think.
But that exists in your campus today without you doing bring your own device at all. Your kids are bringing cell phones with data plans right now. That environment exists whether you're doing bring your own device or not.
And I think you're correct. It's dangerous.
Absolutely.
Understand that anything that's powerful is inherently dangerous. And that's why the responsible use is so important, the responsible use training. Also understand that education is not a risk-neutral endeavor. We keep trying to think it is, and we use what I call knucklehead policy, right? That I can say this again because I was a knucklehead in school, so they would make a rule because I did something wrong that affected everyone on the stage, didn't slow me down at all. I went on to the next thing. So understand that, yes, there is risk here involved, and I think that the conversation with parents and students themselves is critical. I'm sure you do student orientations too. We talk to students directly about those dangers and the consequences of stepping outside those things, both imposed by us, but also self-imposed by going into inherently dangerous areas. But if you go from it, if you keep looking at this, decide, okay, once the risk gets down to whatever this is, I'm going to go that way, you'll never go that way.
Let me get to a question over here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this is something that could be implemented at the college level, because where I'm currently teaching and where I run a program, they have no tolerance for any devices in the classroom. It's stated right in every syllabi. It's stated everywhere around the school and the campus. And I mean, something like this seems like it would be definitely good for the school, but you know, the administration doesn't seem like it would tolerate any such program because we're dealing with a lot of high-risk students and whatnot, and also the problem with access seems to be an issue as well.
The great advantage of a college is you can charge a technology fee. We can't. If we could charge a $5 technology fee or whatever that is, so you could, yeah, I mean, you could do BYOT for sure, but you could also actually provide a device by just putting in, many already do, charge that type of fee.
And I would say the number of college students with an internet-enabled device is even significantly higher than K-12. So you've got a high 90% of your student base with that device ready to roll as it sits right now. So it would seem like a very easy thing to start implementing.
I think the thing with BYOT that we all need to come to terms with is, in these economic times, it's the one way we potentially have for students to be connected, to leverage as much as what students own, and the district find a solution for those students who are the have-nots, in an effort that every student has the ability to be online during the school day. We see that as essential to our success in our learning systems going forward. We hear from teachers that students who are online do better because they're able to, it's their modality for learning, and they're able to, like you say, do that back channel communication and effectively leverage what the teacher's doing in more meaningful ways. And it's just essential, I think. We haven't seen the nightmare scenarios surface. We have BYOT, 7 different devices with 9-year-olds, and it works fine. It's just a matter of having the courage and investing in the necessary infrastructure to make a run at it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great part of what Bailey just talked about. We started this whole endeavor by giving 5th graders smartphones back in 2009, and we really felt like if we could test the waters with 5th graders connecting to the internet using these devices, that as the kids were older, there's a maturity level that you would feel comfortable saying, yeah, this is something that we, number one, see significant improvements, and it does have an effect on education. And number 2, teachers can manage these in the devices and in the classrooms. And number 3, that it's not this rogue, very, very dangerous environment. And we did that in 2009. We piloted it. Now we have, 1,700 smartphones out with 5th graders, and now our kids are bringing devices in. So I guess my segue into that would be, you have to decide the pace at which you're going to implement this in your community based on their tolerance of acceptance. And, I think what all of us have done is we had an understanding prior to rolling these things out, what is the tolerance level for our community? Because if you tried to go too quick, your community is very powerful and they can kill these initiatives in a heartbeat. So you have to understand the tolerance of your community, of your teachers, and you go at the pace at which they're comfortable doing.
Great. I want to try and get one more live stream question in before we close up.
Well, one of the questions in our chat room is asking a lot about equity issues in terms of access to technology. How would you address certain districts, communities that, a lot of the kids just don't have the money or their family resources to have access to mobile devices or laptops?
So we had brought our board members into this particular class of 9-year-olds that I just mentioned. And one of the board members said, I've got an iPhone and a Droid that are in my drawer because I've upgraded. What if we repurpose those? And then I said, how many parents have those devices where they've gotten the new iPhone and they don't get rid of the old one, and then you use it as a Wi-Fi connected device? You don't need the cell phone aspect of its operation.
Well, Go ahead, sorry.
So that's, I mean, there's a lot of different strategies. The other, when a principal was tagged with this in our district, goes, look, the fact that we have 15 of the students that are connected, the other 10 don't have to wait in line for the district-provided equipment that's in the back of the room.
Well, and I think there's a couple other pieces of this. One is we just rolled out 2,200 Android devices that cost us $150. You just saw Amazon come out with a $199 device, so the price starts dropping. The other side is we are free in public education, so equity is always on our mind, and we're doing everything we can to meet that. But once we continue to show the educational purpose, what we're finding in Riverside is, and again, we're 67% free and reduced lunch, those parents are finding the funds to buy those devices because they see the meaningfulness of it. It's not just a toy anymore. They're not just playing Angry Birds. They're learning English. They're, doing those type of things.
But Angry Birds is fun.
And the other thing that I would add is don't assume you know what the equity percentage is in your district. Go out and do a survey of it, because in our most economically disadvantaged high schools and junior highs, when we asked those kids, how many of you have an internet-enabled device, we were amazed at the number of kids. So equity absolutely is an issue. Don't assume you know what that percentage is. And again, go back to what these tools facilitate: collaboration, thinking about how you use district-provided devices differently. So there's an answer to the equity issue. Again, it's, do you really want to do this kind of a program, and are you not going to let the roadblocks stop you? And that's just, you've just got to move forward and say, we're going to make this happen.
Great. Well, I want to thank all three of you gentlemen for a great presentation. I hope it's inspired some of you to maybe take a look at some of these things, whether it's bring your own technology or virtualization or cloud computing, to maybe implement in your district. So thank you so much.